Hey, so longtime viewers to this stream will note that probably beginning 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I was calling that there would be a top and then a crash in terms of number of web developers being hired and job availability for those positions as as the economics changed and these companies were no longer in hyper growth mode. And I imagined that it might take like 15 years, but it looks like it might happen much sooner than I thought. Yeah, usually when I make predictions, I think I'm super early. And so even my 15-year prediction I thought might be early, but like it's been 2 years and it's already happening. Now, the question is, does it like super crash from here or does it like kind of bounce its way down, right? I kind of think it super crashes. Like, because the problem is, so it's like you guys know about queuing theory, right? Like, if there's people standing in line for something, if you service the queue faster than people are showing up in line, then you're fine, right? You're totally fine and everything's good and everything looks the same. Like your time to service a dude looks constant. Don't think of that the wrong way, but your time to serve a, a line waiting person looks constant. And then as soon as you're not handling them barely fast enough, right? It starts rising. And the numbers can get quite astronomical because, like, if you go an hour with the queue length slowly building up, then each new person who shows up in the queue has to wait the entire queue length, which gets longer every time, right? And so you can be at one servicing speed and think you're totally fine, and you can go epsilon above that and end up in a very bad situation if you're not able to speed it up, right? So think about the inverse with regard to employees in a given industry, right? And this is probably what happened to the auto workers industry, by the way, in the 70s, right? You have some number of people, like there's all these people in college right now for computers thinking they're going to get out and be in this awesome job market, right? So those are all people in line. You've already got people in the industry now who are going to be in the front of those people once like Facebook and Google and et cetera get more aggressive in downsizing, right? So you've got some rate of production of people who want computer jobs, and the rate of consumption used to be roughly matched to that rate of production, but now it's much lower. So what you can expect is the line will just get tremendously long very fast. It'll be like a super bullwhip effect. Your CEO said no layoffs planned this year, but you can't rule that out if needed. Yeah. I mean, a lot of CEOs are expecting they might have to downsize by like 20 or 30%, but are putting it off as long as possible. Because nobody wants to fire people if they don't have to. Why is the tech industry downsizing so much? Is it just because the COVID boom is over? No. Okay, here's the biggest factor, right? And again, I am not very schooled in this, but you can watch, everything I learned about this, I learned from the All In podcast, so you can watch that, right? So the problem is the current, or up until this year, economy of venture capital that was funding all of these companies, right? How does venture capital work? Well, people out in the world have money that they want to invest and get more money back, right? And they have a variety of things that they could do. And so people are just trying to do what is the best thing that they do, that they can. What is their best option to make money, right? That's just how it goes. And these are often like large institutions, like, pension funds or whoever, like lots of different things. Frickin' universities with endowments. Okay. So they want to invest their money somewhere. So venture capitalists offer them one kind of way to invest their money. And that kind of way is as follows. Hey, we're going to pick some basket of technology companies and we're going to invest in them probably relatively early when we can get a good price. And we're going to try to pick winners. And because these are technology companies, and these days technology mostly means software, even though I don't think that's correct, because I don't think most of this software is technology, but Nevertheless, they say, okay, especially in software, you can have this result where if a company is successful, it can be tremendously valuable relative to its number of employees or its capital outlay. Because if you think of in the old days, if you were a global company before the internet, you had to have like offices around the world. You had to ship things around the world or something. You were probably dealing in physical goods. Now, if you're one of these internet companies that just like sells people hats on Twitch for $5 or whatever, right? You can have one office somewhere in the world. Your customer base can be the entire world, and you can sell them things that cost almost nothing to reproduce, right? And so, with modern software companies, the uh, the value of the company, in other words, how much can you make over some predicted time frame? That's a complex thing in its own, which we'll get to, right? Um, is much higher than with traditional, heavier capital outlay companies, and so it's been a much more uh, lucrative thing to invest in, especially once people see it working, right? So it was working amazingly, and then people got over enthusiastic with dumb companies during 1999 2000. That blew up really fast, and so people were skittish, but people were still making internet companies in 2001, 2002, 2004, etc. And a lot of those ended up being hugely valuable when people decided again that this was a reasonable investment sector, right? Then it took off again because people saw it happening, so more people are willing to put money in, right? Okay. So now, what's the value of a company? Well, it's sort of how much can you get by selling your portion of the ownership in the company, right? Which, if you're private, like if the company's early and isn't a publicly listed company on the stock market, it depends on, you know, is another company going to buy it maybe, or is it going to go public later? And if another company is going to buy it, then, you sort of maybe have market specific projections, right? Um, if it's listed publicly on the stock market, then it tends to be something more like how much money is this thing projected to make per year, or has it made in the past couple of years, right? Depending on how you want to think about it, like whether it's rapidly growing or not, you may choose one or the other of those, right? Um, and there's just some ratio that is considered to be reasonable for like how many years of earnings is worth it to pay for some stock because you're likely to get more back later, um, just by virtue of the way that the company returns money to shareholders, right? And so, of course, that's of course complicated, right? Because usually you just want to sell your stock to somebody else who thinks it's going up. And maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but you want to have sold it when it's higher than you bought it for, right? But if nobody ever buys it, there's just stuff like dividends, for example, right? By which you can receive uh, compensation as a stockholder. So that price earnings ratio is a big factor in how much companies are worth. I mean, this is where it gets kind of complicated and where I understand it less, right? But okay, so a lot of companies have a lot of debt, right? They incur debt. That's sort of the VC model, in fact, right? Is you spend a bunch of money early because something seems promising, and you make it back later in volume and all that, right? Um, that becomes harder at high interest rates, right? So firstly, if the economy is going downward, there's less and less spare consumer capital over time to be available for your company to make, right? So it's just you're facing into headwinds already, and then the debt that you took out to fund your company like appreciates. So that's an issue, right? But also, so going back to what I said at the beginning about people are trying to invest money and they want to invest it in the best place possible, right? And when interest rates are higher, which is what's happening now to try to combat inflation, right? Um, then there are other places where you can get a higher nominal return than you would have before. right? If interest was zero, you put in $100 this year into like, some bond, right? And they might give you $100.25, 5 years from now or something because the interest rate is very low. But if the interest rate is frickin' 5% that they're paying on those bonds, right? $105 looks a lot better than $100.50, and it looks more appealing relative to a risky technology company that is facing headwinds, right? And so um, all of these things change at once. And there's just more factors too. Like when there's stock market crashes like we just had, a lot of these investment institutions lose a lot of the large pools of capital that they were using to invest in things like this, right? And so there's more of a shortage of that capital and there's more competition for where it goes. There's basically a bunch of things that go bad at the same time. And I'm not the expert in the topic. I'm just outlining it broadly. I've never run a startup model company. It's always been not my bag, but this is my understanding of how that generally goes, right? Is this about the Twitter purchase? No, I'm just talking about the coming downsizing of all these companies, right? So basically, both the number of people looking for jobs and the number of companies that even exist right now are calibrated for last year when the economy was doing much better. We didn't have runaway inflation. Actually, we already did, but nobody was admitting it. We didn't have all these supply chain problems that were as persistent as they are. Like we had some, but we thought they were more temporary, right? And all sorts of other things. And so there's just too many companies now. Some of them have to go out of business. That's just how that works. And also, most of the medium to large size growth track companies just have to have more modest targets, right? That they're aiming for. I honestly don't think this is a very bad time to start a very like seed stage, like low burn rate company right now, because by the time you have your shit together and you're ready to grow, we might be out of this economic thing unless we decide to set some nukes off, right? Which would be the worst thing that's ever happened in human history. So let's not do that. Sort of lost my train of thought there, but oh yeah. So if you want to start a really small company, don't let the bad economic conditions deter you because it's maybe still not that hard to find funding for really good ideas if you're small. It's like people who are in the Series B, C, D stage right now, they're in trouble, and a lot of them are going to go out of business. Yeah, and just the number of the ones that don't go out of business are going to reduce headcount. And so the whole point is there's going to be a lot more surplus in these kinds of jobs, right? And so the kinds of jobs that will be very hard to get placed in are the kinds where you have no particular skill, like generic front end development or generic back end development, because there'll be a massive surplus of those people, right? But as always, if you are especially good at what you do, right? If you know something that not a lot of people know, etc., variations of that, then you can do fine. Then this kind of thing won't touch you. Or you can do what I always do, which is I just go off in a corner and do my own thing. Like that's what I did during the dot-com boom and the dot-com bust, right? And as a result, I do not have as much money as Marc Andreessen, but I'm also good at making video games. Fake high price to reveal lower high price. Yeah, I believe that was the strategy.